ladies and gentlemen, and all incorporated transhuman algorithmic entities as defined by the European Union Court of Human Rights, live from the near future, in association with King Waspinator Studios, and filmed before a live studio audience in beautiful downtown Icon City, Total Party Thiel presents yet another episode of America's Next Top Antichrist, with your host, King Krampus. And now here he is, the moment you've all been waiting for, King Krampus.
Peter Thiel is a dangerous maniac and should probably have his access and assets stripped from him as a matter of public safety. Not to slander the guy. It's not like I know him. It's a name you've heard once in a while over the years, brought up in various conversations about the tech industry and all that kind of stuff. But recently he's had a lot more public-facing appearances than he's had in the past, and I don't think he's very well served by it. But such is the case with many of these tech bros who are also trying to dabble their hands and trying to be fake celebrities because you invented a website in college or whatever the fuck. You know, Elon Musk, the guy who invented banking online and buying other people's companies so that he could pretend that he's inventing things from science fiction that was written in the 60s and all that kind of stuff. Like, they're all crazy right now. Seemingly. Period overall. We seem to find ourselves living in the most corrupt period in human history. On all levels of leadership. Church leadership, government leadership, corporate leadership. And one must ask, are there any institutions that are worthy of trust anymore, that have not shown themselves to be compromised in some form or fashion? There's several things that I believe to be wrong with the common perceived paradigm, at least for Americans. Stuff that traces back to things that we're taught when we're young. For one thing, French revolutionary left-right politics is dead. People are still clinging to these labels because they're politically convenient, both for their own self-identity and to identify those that they view as the enemy. But there is no revolutionary parliament where everyone's sitting on one side or the other. Their issues are all entangled, and they will frequently chase each other around on certain subjects to try to gain advantage on the other. And there's really only a couple of core basic things that the left and right actually really stick their guns on. So it's basically how you feel about abortion, is whether or not you're left or right. And everything else that you say that you believe in apparently is up for debate, depending on what the other side says they're into. Church leadership across pretty much most of the major Western religions, especially the Christian ones, do not seem to be very well aligned with the attitudes and desires of their lay populations. Perhaps that's not an unusual occurrence across history, but you can only frustrate a people so far before they will turn to other avenues. Corporate leadership is clearly living in a kind of a paranoid, schizophrenic delusion of their own construction. They have too much money, they've microdosed too many times, they've convinced themselves of all sorts of things about their importance and value. Military leadership apparently is not very helpful in times when, like, you need them to do things that you might want them to do in dire circumstances. That movies and fiction has always told us to anticipate that, if X happens and John Sheridan will arise to, like, tell Earth Dome to quit trying to stomp on the people of Earth's rights. But no, they follow the chain of command, and that's why war crimes get committed, because they're ordered by people who themselves don't actually have any personal sense of responsibility for the actions they are taking, because they're just vessels of the voters, and they're just doing what their advisors are telling them, and they got this grand calculus for everything. And no one down the chain of command wants to be the guy who's like, no, I can't do this. This goes against what we were all told that we joined the military for. So they're an unreliable organization. Science is not. They're scientists, unfortunately, in order to be able to do science, have to be employed by people who are using their science for purely profit-driven purposes, or to make things kill better. So, sure, trust the science all you want, but just keep that in mind. That's no... A sign of intelligence is not necessarily a sign of any ethical standard or character. They don't always go together. In fact, they seldom do. Generally, your kindest, most ethical and moral people are typically on the lower end of the IQ scale. Do with that as you want. In place of a left-right line paradigm, what we should be looking at is not the four-quadrant map that we're using right now in place of it in recent years, but I would describe something that looks more like a hydra. You have a central mass of a body, and that's proto-feudalism. Feudalism is a part of it, but medieval feudalism was a specific system, whereas proto-feudalism I'm using as a way of describing that the universal characteristics that a lot of societies had going all the way back into late Stone Age periods, Bronze Age, Iron Age, all the way up into the industrial model, where you have a bloodline-based nobility ruling over a occasionally stacked, or sometimes just all squashed together, common class beneath them, with varying degrees of rights and privileges granted by that noble class. Beneath feudalism is theocracy, the complete rule of the church or of another religion. And then you have the Hydra's heads, which are all the different things that we typically have been calling left and right, but are all really left in their own way. They're all outgrowths of feudalism, trying to escape feudalism by coming up with different formulas of how we're going to run the world best. And because of the way their heads stretch out from each other, they all look like they're to the right or left of one another, depending on how they figure their own positioning. And they all hate each other because they have nothing else to really look at, and they very rarely ever remember that there's a tail down there. But to my point of view, the left-right string is not just a narrow line, but on the right end side it comes to a narrow point, and that point is theocracy. And on the left end it splays apart into a bunch of different threads that all hate each other. But from that you get imperialism and liberal democracy and republicanism and Nazism and communism and democratic socialism and socialism and Star Trekism and all that kind of stuff. Like they're all manifestations of the same desire to try to rule for the people, although some are more misguided than others. Using modern labels right now to describe what we're turning into as an oligarchy, where it might be definitionally correct. While it might be correct by definition, the word plutocracy also would apply by the same term. So why aren't we calling ourselves being ruled by plutocrats? I don't think it's helpful. Like most normal people who are not very well educated and don't have a huge vocabulary don't really know what oligarchy means. It sounds bad, kind of vaguely, but it doesn't sting the same as just referring to it as these guys are trying to return us to a feudal model. They want to be nobles. They want to be able to pass their nobility on to their own children and all that kind of stuff. They want to be able to have power over everyone, and that they view themselves as having a right to our labor and our work and our views. They have a right to our votes. We are all serfs. We've been serfs. It's just becoming a little bit more open. It's not that we're transitioning into techno-feudalism. We already have been in techno-feudalism, like since the end of World War II at the very least, if not the entire industrial period. Second paradigm problem. Religion and science are not in conflict. This has been a talking point since the Scopes trial, basically since Darwinism came on the scene. There's been this rift between science and religion. That doesn't make sense. Religion is opposed to government because religion and government are both actually doing the same thing or wanting to do the same thing. They're both wanting to set laws. They want to manage and control the population around them. They expect some sort of tribute to come into them from that population in the form of taxes or tithes. Like that's what's going on there. That's another part of why you have separation in church of state as an idea, because like the church, earliest forms of feudalism had less of an aristocracy around the central core nobles running the whole show, your kings, pharaohs, early emperors, all that kind of stuff. They were instead supported more directly by their, well, they didn't really have churches back then, but the religious structure of the temples was much more focused around the rulership, as to, like the whole thing of the pharaohs are living gods, Roman emperors become gods, all that kind of stuff. That feudalism increased the size of the nobility, empowering military force, and the church, even at that time, was given a lot of power and influence, but was also separated a little bit because the church did not command quite the same amount of physical material strength in the form of arms and soldiers. That was the province of the nobility. Without the nobility, the military is kind of now a free-form business occupation that's part of the bureaucracies of communist and democratic countries. Science is opposed to magic, because science and magic are the same thing. The only difference is that science is stuff that you understand because it's been explained, and access to the information of how it works and how the people who developed it got there is available to the public if you have the understanding and means to get access to that information. Magic occludes it all, hides it, and keeps it mysterious. It's part of why it took so long for certain types of technological development to gel and give us the Industrial Revolution in the modern world, because for a long time people lived under a magic system where the people who did understand principles of engineering and mathematics and how to work chemistry and all that other kind of stuff typically kept their secrets to themselves, and at most passed chunks of it on to their apprentices, but would often keep things to themselves. So time and time again, innovations and ideas have been lost to the grave by people who failed to communicate any of this to their underlings because of paranoia that their ideas would be stolen and other things. Science avoids that. And because people understand science, in fiction we've had to make magic more and more fanciful, because a magician in a story making gunpowder doesn't seem magical anymore to us, even though he is creating a fireball. But now he's got to draw upon his chi and his chakras from some X dimension and all that kind of shit, because he's got the blood of dragons in him and other stupid childish things. And these are just kind of basic rudimentary things that, at least when I was a kid, were things you hear people say, other kids, adults at that time, that, religion and science, that science is just another religion. Fucking morons. We live on a planet ruled by delusional, dangerous maniacs. But if the government does not benefit us, then it is useless to us. If the church does not benefit us, it is useless to us. If corporations do not benefit us, they are useless to us. And one can only hope that we will at least live long enough to get to see some of these people be frog-marched at the guillotine. Because occasionally they need to be reminded that the people at the top only exist because the people at the bottom tolerate them. The people at the bottom know they need leaders. They like having leaders. They like having people to zazz them up and tell them how good they are and to get them to go march off and do things. People take pride in being a good worker or being a good citizen or being a soldier. They don't need to be abused to get them to work for you or to accept you as their leader. And so taking advantage of them will work for a little while. But if you push it too far and too long and overdo it, well, who are you to stand in the face of change and history when it comes clawing at your doors? Why Krampus? Because the world doesn't deserve Santa Claus anymore. You've all been a lot of naughty boys and girls, and eventually you're gonna find some coal in your stocking if you don't shape up soon. So until next time,
Stay crampinated.